So our next speaker is Dr. Cressida Lyon from Bath, and Cressida will be telling us about promoting student engagement with feedback and skills development using an ePortfolio.
Thank you very much, James. I have to say I'm a bit nervous following Vanessa's talk, full of data, but we'll see how we go. So over the last year, as James has said, I've been working on this ePortfolio, which I've hoped will help our students to engage more with their feedback and reflect on it and use it to improve their skills development. So why am I interested in feedback, first of all? Well, in this room, I'm sure we're very much aware that feedback is absolutely crucial to student success, both in their learning and also in their achievement. And there's a whole wealth of literature on this, including this seminal paper by John Hattie, which I've referenced here. But we also know that students are less satisfied with feedback and assessment than any other aspect in higher education. And there are various lines of evidence for that. So why are the students so unsatisfied with feedback? And I think that there are sort of four potential reasons for this. First of all, students don't always realise that they're getting feedback. So I'm sure all of you in this room will have had the experience where you've spent time producing feedback for your students, only to realise later that they haven't actually looked at it, didn't even know it was there on your VLE, for example. The other reason can be that sometimes students will look at the mark, they're happy with the mark, it's what they're expecting, so they might not read their feedback in more detail. I often worry that students don't understand the feedback that we give them. They don't understand the terminology that we're using and therefore can't use it to improve their work. And also, even when students do read their feedback and want to engage with it, they don't know what to do with it in order to improve their future work. So in order to enable students to use their feedback more effectively, I've created this ePortfolio, which we've piloted this year. And we piloted it on all of our bioscience first year undergraduates, so that's 260 students in total. It's based on the Developing Engagement with Feedback Toolkit, which is published on the Advanced HE website. So I haven't reinvented the wheel, I've just adapted it into an ePortfolio, and the software that we use at Bath is Mahara. So this ePortfolio provides a space online for the students to log feedback each time they're given some from their coursework assignments. They can log it and reflect on it and think what went well, what could they do better next time. It also provides them with the opportunity to look for patterns, and it encourages them to look for patterns in their feedback. So is there a particular skill that's being picked up each time in multiple pieces of coursework, and helps them to identify skills that they might want to develop, and provides links to particular resources, particularly within the university, so within our academic skills centre, to help them to develop those particular skills. So how did this project run over the year? So to start off with, I provided an online workshop in week 8, so sort of midway through semester 1. And this was timed to align with when the students got their first piece of feedback. This was an online workshop simply because of the number of students that were involved in the project and the fact that they would need to be logging into the ePortfolio software. And the first workshop focused on showing them how to use the software, as well as discussing what feedback is, how they can use it to improve their work and why it's important, why this logging process in the portfolio should be helpful to them. Then we logged their first piece of feedback together during the session. And the idea was then that the students could independently log their feedback throughout the rest of the semester and into semester 2. At the start of semester 2, I ran another online workshop where the aim was that we would look through all of the feedback that they've been given and try to identify patterns in that feedback. And I worked through a sort of worked example to give them an idea of how they could pick out particular skills from pieces of feedback that they'd been given. And we also worked on locating resources, and I had a member of the Academic Skills Centre team on the call with me, and he helped them to identify specific resources to things that they mentioned, skills that they mentioned, that specific ones that they wanted to develop. To evaluate how successful this process was, I asked the students to complete questionnaires during both of the workshops to try and get them to actually do it. And we also did a focus group in semester 2, and we analysed some of the Academic Skills Centre resources, the usage of these resources. So at the start in workshop 1, the students could certainly see value in putting their feedback into action, and they could see that the feedback ePortfolio would be useful for that. So when they rated the extent that they believe they should put their feedback into action, they rated it, as you can see, as 9.2 out of 10. So they could see it was important. And when they rated the extent to which the feedback ePortfolio could help them to do this, they rated that as 7 out of 10. So they did see value in this process. However, when I got to workshop 2 at the beginning of semester 2, all enthusiastic, I asked them if they had logged any feedback, and 53% of the students said they hadn't logged any feedback at all by the start of semester 2, and only 5% said that they'd logged everything. And of course, those were the students that attended the workshop. So yeah, I was a little bit disheartened at this point. So I was interested to hear why, and so I asked them with open text comments, why hadn't they logged the feedback? And a bit of sort of thematic analysis on that showed that the main reasons were that the students believed they hadn't had any feedback, or they hadn't had much, not enough to bother with. Now, I know that they had received feedback on several pieces of work at the stage of the semester. And so there's something going awry here, that they're not realising that they're not realising that the feedback is there, they're not thinking that it is feedback and that it's important for their development, or they need to improve the literacy towards feedback. So that's something we like to work on this next year. So I was a bit disheartened, but then at the end of semester 2, I asked them to submit their ePortfolio, and it was a really low stakes assessment, 2% of 1 unit of year 1, so it didn't count for much. And actually, I found that 67%, so the majority of the students did actually submit the portfolio. I was quite pleased with that number after the previous one, and that when I looked through them, the submissions of these ePortfolios were really high quality. That most of the students I've got all sorts of boxes down here. Most of the students had logged several pieces of feedback and included lots of detail, some of them absolutely loads of detail, and that they'd reflected on the feedback that they'd been given. They hadn't just copied and pasted it, they thought about what that meant and what they could do in the future. And in almost all of the submissions, they've gone on to identify a skill that they wanted to develop. And some of them had found the resources that they would need to do that. And if they hadn't, I encouraged them to do that and sent them some links in my feedback to them. So I was quite pleased at the end of it all that they had actually used it. We also looked at the analytics from the Academic Skills Centre to see whether our cohort that had used the ePortfolio, which is shown in the dark green, had clicked and logged in and booked things through the Academic Skills Centre more than the previous year's cohort. So this is just for our biosciences students. And it's nothing major, but there were certainly more logins, slightly more resource views, and more viewed and booked events. It's pretty minor. But perhaps it's to do with the ePortfolio, perhaps it's something else completely, but interesting. So what next? What are we planning for this year? So I'm very thankful to have some funding through the university's Teaching Development Fund to help me to develop and improve the portfolio over the coming academic year. And I've got 2 fantastic student researchers, I think they might have joined on Zoom, so hello, who are helping me to improve the ePortfolio. And they've done some brilliant work over the summer and had given me some advice. These students used the ePortfolio themselves last year, so they have insider knowledge. And so they've recommended we move to OneNote rather than Mahara, for example, because they find that more comfortable to use and more comfortable with that software. So all sorts of changes that they're suggesting, colour coding and putting more imagery in. So it's been really handy to have their views. We're also adding an employability skills log. So this will be a sort of table of important key employability skills, and the students will be encouraged to log any evidence for those as they go through their degree, so that when they come to applying for their placements or eventually applying for jobs, that they'll have those little stories, those little tidbits to put in, to say in an interview and to put into their cover letter, for example. So hopefully that will be really useful. We're also extending to another department, Department for Health, and I have a collaboration with the Academic Skills Centre, who are they're making some resources to help coach the students more on feedback literacy. Because it's going to be even more students this year, I'm creating some online interactive training to coach the students on what feedback is, how they can use it, why the ePortfolio is important, so that we can then share that within departments in university. And I'm very happy to share what I've done. So if you wanted to be involved in this and use it in your own students, you can see my email is on the slide there, so please do get in touch.
Thank you very much, Cressida. That was a great talk. Again, if you don't have any questions on Padlet, we're getting left shamefully behind by the end of the parallel section in Padlet use, but we can make up for it with in-person questions, and Aidan was the first.
Hi, yeah, I was just wondering, like, in what form do you provide feedback to the students throughout the course of the semester? Is it like on particular assessments? Is it on essays? And like, how timely is it? What's the sort of manner in which students are actually mechanically receiving it?
Okay, so for those on Zoom, the question was, how is feedback provided within our department? So that does vary. So they'll get feedback from their tutors. That might be I tend to do my track changes on Word, but it might be handwritten feedback. And the same goes with their lab reports. Some of those are hard copies and they'll have handwritten comments, and some would be submitted on the VLE and have comments through the VLE. So it's varied, and it depends on, and that might be a bit of a challenge for the students. One of the comments from the focus group that we ran was that it would be much easier if the feedback just automatically transposed into the ePortfolio, which to me, you're not really reflecting on it if it's just automatically beaming across. But I can see that having all these different modes of transmission of feedback is tricky. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah.
One more question, and I'll take it from here.
Anecdotal perhaps, but I really like these ideas. But the weakest link was obviously the staff giving the feedback, so they're not giving good quality feedback, then it's exposed. And I was thinking anecdotally, it actually does improve staff feedback they give, knowing that other academics are going to be looking at it. So I guess it's more a statement of the question, but to phrase the question, what do other staff think about the scheme and how their feedback to teach in this kind of space?
So I suppose that, well, it's only me that has looked at the ePortfolios and the sort of feedback that they've logged. Nobody's brought it up as an issue with me, and I did present it at the department meeting. But yeah, no one's brought that up. What I did have in mind for this year, for both the students and the staff, is sort of more regular reminders to the students to use the ePortfolio. And if I know I'm going to be asking the students to log their first piece of feedback in week 8, to perhaps email the staff in week 7 and say, please make sure you've got your tutees feedback given to them in time for this session. But,
okay, super. Thanks so much, Cressida. That's great.
Thank you.